welcome to another episode of Witty CFB. Your host Rob Sheply here, and on today's episode we are going to continue on the Big 12 track and talk about the Utah Utes, who, those of you who don't know, probably the favorite in all of the Big 12 this year. You know, when I sit there and when I look at the Big 12, I said this before on the show, but they're, to me, obviously the favorite in the Big 12. Obviously, with the Pac-12's demise, it was natural for Utah to kind of go to the Big 12 and ultimately play there. Now, when I look at this team, I see a ton of talent, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, despite all the injuries that they've had, and despite not having Cam Rising, they had a pretty solid year last year. I think ultimately what kind of killed their 2023 championship aspirations was that really early loss to Oregon State, and that kind of killed their sort of national championship contender status. And you know, even when I look back and think about the Utah teams of the past let's say 5 to 10 years, I mean, they've knocked off USC a bunch of times. They're, have won some Pac-12. They've won some Pac-12 titles. But to me, the one thing that kind of always sort of gets in their way is they always end up losing one random game on the schedule that should be a clear win. Even when you think back the past couple years, it was never so much that they couldn't compete against the top dogs. Like, in the Pac-12, they could compete with the Oregons, they could compete with the USCs, they can compete with all those teams. But ultimately, what it comes down to is those random couple games that they end up losing, or that kind of just got way too close for comfort too. So when I think about this year, number one, I'm excited to see Cam Rising back. This dude, I'm telling you, he's amazing to watch. He's got a great arm, natural leader, and he's been busting his ass to try to get back onto the field. And this time last year there was obviously a bunch of talk that he would be ready for the 2023 season, obviously, and for good reason. It was probably best just for him to kind of just sit the year and do it one more time, and it looks like it kind of all worked out anyway. And especially with the first season of the Big 12, it's going to be a big deal for him to get up and running and kind of really make sure that they win the games that they're supposed to win. And as I look at this team, I think one of the biggest things that I saw was, it seems like Cam Rising's knee's healthy. He kind of hurt that during the Rose Bowl the prior year, but they did bring in some receivers. I think the big transfer was USC's receiver Darian Springer. So he's coming in as a transfer. You have Cam Rising there, and also I think the one thing we're going to see about Utah more is I think we're going to see them run the ball more. I think obviously they've always had an impressive amount of depth. Even when you think about last year on the defensive side of the ball, they got hit with some injuries. But the one thing that you can't doubt is a Kyle Whittingham coach defense. They're going to be disciplined. They play their style of football, and they're going to fight you in the trenches. Those are things that are just common on any Kyle Whittingham team. And actually, speaking of Kyle, Morgan Scaley obviously just got, re-announced as the successor. I know a couple years ago he sort of had that racist remark. I think it was some sort of remark that kind of got into some trouble, but time has passed and he's done what he needed to do in order to get back into the graces of Utah's donors and staff and all that good stuff. So because I know Kyle's kind of said before that he only wants to coach as long as his dad did, and I believe he's 64 now, going into his 20th year. So if they re-announce it, you got to think he maybe has another season or two. And I might even go out on a limb and say if Utah wins the Big 12 title and makes a playoff appearance, Whittingham might just go off into the sunset. I mean, he really, he's pretty much just about done it all as a college football coach. I think the only thing that's really kind of evaded him is a national title. and at the same time too, even if he doesn't get there, he's still going to be one of probably the greatest Utah coach that they've had. Highly respected coach, and just like Nick Saban, he's gonna have his office there. Morgan Scaly can always call him up if they need something. So he's gonna be a part of the program, but I think it's more or less just kind of something that was inevitably gonna happen. It wasn't one of those things that they kind of said, oh yeah, we're gonna do some outside people or hire a consulting firm or do something crazy like that. I think it was pretty obvious from the onset that was supposed to be kind of the way that they were going, and I don't see any issues there. And they've also, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, I think it's going to be interesting in terms of obviously I talked about before with they had the injury bug last year, but to what extent is the new depth coming in to be able to maintain what they had last year? Because especially in the Big 12, it's, I'd say, arguably the most wide open conference. Now granted, I think Utah is and should be the favorite, but you have Oklahoma State sitting there, you have Kansas sitting there, you have Arizona sitting in there, and I would say my wild card for the Big 12 that I think everybody needs to be looking out for is UCF, which I'd like to do on a deep dive with them eventually. But so those are just 5 teams that I just rattled off that easily could make some noise this year in terms of the Big 12 title. And even just taking a quick dive into their schedule, because what I always ask myself with Utah is what game could possibly trip them up. And they got Southern Utah, Baylor, Utah State, Oklahoma. I think at Stillwater, that's gonna be a game that's definitely on my calendar, September 21st. You have Arizona the week after. Now Arizona, I get where the hype is, but I have some questions about Brett Brennan, and I just don't. I think they're going to take a little bit of a step back. I don't think it's going to be a crazy step back, because it's just going to be a little bit of a new team, because I know a lot of them also followed Fish to Washington, so we'll be curious how that happens too. And then they got the rebuild over at Arizona State with Kenny Dillingham. You got TCU. Willie Fritz under Houston will be a fascinating game. BYU, Colorado. So I mean, even when you look at that schedule, is Utah favored for majority of those games? I would say so, but in the history of Utah football and what I've seen, I think there's going to be one of these games that they're just going to slip on. They're going to have that equivalent to they're going to have the Oregon State slip up like they did last year. I mean, also it didn't help too that they got whooped by Oregon before, and they played Washington tough too, but obviously Washington went on to compete for the title, but it is what it is. But in terms of just Utah football in general, I'll go as far to say, Kenny Whittingham is definitely one of my top 5 favorite coaches in all of college football. I'm excited to see it, and even when I look at the schedule, there's a bunch of wild cards here. But I think as long as they win the games that they're supposed to win, they show up big on the big time stage, and with the defense should be as consistent as long as the depth stays there. I think there's going to be some growing pains a little bit with Cam Rising, but I think as long as they make sure that they really get the running game going, because I think it's gonna take longer than it takes for Cam Rising to kind of get into a groove again. I get it, he's experienced and all that stuff, but this is a pretty serious injury that he's coming back from, and ultimately time's gonna tell. But my guess is I'm not gonna be surprised from now if we look from January and we're talking about Utah winning their first Big 12 title.